right, ladies and gentlemen, I've been hearing a lot of mixed opinions about this video in particular by HC Casual. And this video is talking about how he's worried that ZZZ's combat may be better than Wuthering Waves. After seeing a title like that, I thought it would be in my best interest to take a review of his channel. And what it looks like to me is that, well, he has one video talking about how ZZZ's combat is good, and it's just been all ZZZ ever since. So you can imagine that there's a degree of bias in here. There's a degree of bias in the content. So we gotta have that framing in mind as we go through. So let's go ahead and give it a look and see how valid these thoughts are. I do have experience in both games.
Hey, it's your resident combo-obsessed bestie, here to say, nah, the title isn't rage bait. I'm genuinely worried, because a few months ago, I would have said Wuthering Waves and Zenless were on equal footing when it comes to their combat. But that was around launch, before I'd spent hundreds of hours with both games. Now, however, I'm not so sure, because I've been struggling with the fact that something about Wuthering Waves combat just doesn't feel quite right. My head says I should love Wuthering Waves a lot more than I do. I mean, in theory, it's right up my alley, but my heart has just never been in it. And I've had a single question rattling around my brain drive me crazy for months. Like, why is it that even though on paper Wuthering Waves has more depth than ZZZ, in the practice the combat feels less cohesive?
Proof? Are we just saying stuff?
And the more I've thought about that gut feeling that something is wrong here, knowing myself and the lifetime I've spent playing games like these, I have to wonder if what's causing that feeling is the possibility that Zenless's combat is just flat out better than Wuthering Waves on some level. In so many other ways, Wuthering Waves is beyond brilliant. It's the Marvel Rivals, the Genshin's Overwatch. It's like everything I know I've been asking for years. It's certainly not a 10, and neither is Zenless, but Wuthering Waves is a very good game, and for a decent amount of my friends, honestly, I'd recommend it over Zenless. Because, you know, Zenless is great, obviously I'm a fan, but it's still way too much of a capital G gacha game, whereas WuWa is progressively feeling more like a game that just happens to be a gacha. The fact that it's a vibrant open world as opposed to a menu simulator definitely helps, but I'm realizing the combat is maybe one of the biggest factors holding back some of its true potential, which probably sounds wild to some of you, because Wuthering Waves combat does feel great and absolutely has more room for the kind of player expression that normally defines character action games, while Zenless is a bit more limited. But have you ever heard the saying, constraints breed creativity? Sometimes the more limitations you have, the more innovative your solutions become, and the Zenless devs have made a few design decisions around their limitations that may be some of the most quietly innovative I've seen in any action game in years.
The main point over here is that in WuWa, you have a lot more options on how to do different things, and it is worse than Zenless because Zenless has more constraints on things. It has more constraints on what you can do, and because of that, you have to do different things or work around the constraints, and that's what makes it good. I have a personal take on this. It's the fact that chain attacks don't stop time in the game, and so you're literally encouraged not to use characters' abilities like Sokaku's. You're literally encouraged like not to cast some of their abilities because it's a massive time loss in the rotation. I'm not sure how I feel about that, like literally being encouraged not to use parts of a character's kit, but let's see where it goes from there.
Surprisingly, they've actually managed to find that rare balance between a high skill ceiling and a low skill floor with combat that can be fun and engaging for all skill levels. And that's something action games like this have always struggled with, and more often than not, you get games that are so afraid of pushing away the casual audience they wind up feeling shallow like FF16, or too overwhelming to be very approachable for the average gamer like Devil May Cry. I've been looking for the perfect gateway game for the longest time, a game that can introduce people to some of the unique satisfaction of stylish character action games, that can smooth over some of the less approachable edges to make it more welcoming for newcomers and casual fans of the genre, while not losing sight of what makes these games so much fun for those of us who love exploring the depth in these combat sandboxes.
Well, yeah, you have hyper-carry teams in WuWa. You have Zhang Liao and the Yinlin team, which is pretty easy to play. You have Jinxie, who's pretty easy to play. And then you have Chang Li if you want to get super sweaty with it. So I feel like that level of progression is there, right? That level of progression in the difficulty is there, is it not?
And I think I may have finally found it in Zenless. While on the other hand, Wuthering Waves feels a bit lacking. Which is where part of my concern comes from, because again, I do like Wuthering Waves, it is a really good game, but the difference between a good game and a truly great one is often a matter of degrees. So even though I feel like Wuthering Waves isn't quite there yet, it's really hard to put a finger on precisely where it's coming up short, and it's been hard to say if I actually love what Wuthering Waves is, or simply what I think it has the potential to one day become.
Wait, so did the video just start off by saying Wuthering Waves is worse than Zenless Zone Zero, but I don't know why? I can't actually define the reason why it's worse. He pulled like a low-key, he pulled like an old Vars. There's something wrong with it, but I don't really actually know why. And so it's worse than ZZZ. What the fuck? Why say this?
So part of me fears this could be yet another one of those action games that lingers on the edge of greatness forever without ever truly living up to it, which would be tragic. But vague fears aren't really helpful, so it's time to get to the bottom of where the line is. Time to figure out what precisely separates good character action games from truly great ones.
This entire video just seems like how to reach word count. This entire video seems like how to reach fucking word count. He's been talking for like 2 minutes, but he said nothing. Like 2 fucking minutes, he said nothing. Oh, this is gonna be a painful one, ladies and gentlemen.
So hi, hello, Hecky G everyone, call me Casual. Welcome to the first in a series of videos where we'll be holding a magnifying glass up to the nuances of combat and two of the best and most accessible newcomers to grace the character action scene in years, to determine who's truly got the sauce to be the next genre-defining legend. The fact that they both happen to be gacha games is, mildly painful, but so was Final Fantasy 16 and Bayo 3 for that matter.
This is 3 minutes turned into 26 minutes? Yeah, it fucking seems like it.
Everything these games that bring you to the table with their combat.
I don't even feel bad talking over it at this point, because like he's just saying nothing.
Into answering the question of the hour, I've got a vague idea of what the answer might be, and it's not the one I expected. Funny enough, I think a lot of the biggest hiccups in Wuthering Waves are thanks to some of the most seemingly innocent aspects of the game mechanics that I believe are holding back a lot of the game's potential. Mechanics that make the combat feel dull and repetitive, when by all rights this should be one of the hypest games on the market. So today's going to be the first of many discussions as we take a closer look at Wuthering Waves versus Endless Zone Zero's combat mechanics and talk about how little differences go a long way when it comes to why one of these games is already starting to feel a bit stale. And look, I know, especially in the gacha community.
Bro said the same exact thing like 4 fucking times already. He's literally said the same exact thing 4 fucking times. Just move on. Get to the fucking points. I'm getting mad watching this video because it's just, there's nothing like, it's just, he's repeated the same thing 4 times already.
Already starting to feel a bit stale. And look, I know, especially in the gacha community, head-to-head comparisons like this can be frowned upon sometimes. There's a prevailing opinion among some that games should stand on their own, right? Some people think if you like or dislike something, you should be able to discuss your fun or your criticism within the context of the game you're criticizing, and not through comparisons to the industry or other games around it. And I get where some of that energy comes from. There are absolutely people out there who will uplift one thing just to drag another down, especially where these companies are concerned, but that's very much not what I'm here to do today. One of the things I've learned in life is to an extent you have to compare everything if you want to properly understand anything. And comparing and dissecting what makes things work, what doesn't, and why is one of the best tactics humans have for gaining a better understanding of the world around us.
Bro has a separate video just on like the disclaimers. Hey, there's too much showing and telling here. Just get to the video, man. Holy
None of us knows everything, and the simple fact of the matter is learning requires explanations, and more often than not, explanations require comparisons. Personally, I know simply going through the process of looking at these games side by side has already given me a better perspective on my own preferences and why I enjoy the kinds of games that I do. And I just think that kind of introspection can be helpful to all of us sometimes, if for no other reason than be able to confidently explain why you like or dislike things beyond just saying, well, this sucks and I hate it. I mean, I could certainly just say, cooldowns suck, and I hate them, and I doubt I'd be entirely alone, but I just think my point might come across better by comparing how the passive gameplay cooldowns inspire makes this game less engaging, while the active decision-making resource-backed mechanics like special energy encourage are part of what's keeping me hooked to this game.
Okay, he made one point. Cooldowns are less engaging than energy. I think they both kind of function the same way because energy is basically the same exact thing as a cooldown, and having higher energy regeneration just means you're lowering your cooldowns. I guess Endless Zone Zero has a lever to reduce cooldowns via energy regeneration stats, because you're not using the baseline skill without energy because it doesn't fucking do anything, right? In Endless Zone Zero, you're never doing that, right? So it's just you only use the enhanced one, and so when your energy's filling back up, that's the cool. It's the same fucking thing.
Comparisons are crucial because they're often almost necessary to provide the context to truly understand not just other people's perspectives, but often your own. And of course, we're not just here to compare Zenless and Wuthering Waves. I mean, that's going to be our focus because I think most of us here are familiar with at least one of these games, so they'll be easiest to talk about. But we are going to be making a lot of comparisons across the entire industry because, in my opinion, looking at the whole instead of laser focusing on individual parts is the only way to have any true perspective. And it's one of the best ways to give legitimately productive feedback beyond just saying, well, just, make the game better. So please know, my comparisons are always for the sake of more effective communication and furthering my own understanding, not trying to start the next Toyo Kuro war in the comments. I apologize for the disclaimer, but if you watch a lot of gacha content, you know exactly why it was probably necessary, especially considering I'm about to say a lot of pretty controversial things across this series of videos, because I'm not going to pull a single punch. We're going to talk about the unique ways these games handle their team building, their quick swapping, why mechanics like Anomaly are underrated, and why mechanics like Concerto are a nightmare, why both of these games seem to be racing to create the same game roguelike, and of course, the problem with this parry, and so much more. All with the focus on moment-to-moment gameplay and fun, not the meta. But that's a lot to discuss in one video, so obviously we're gonna spread it out a bit. Today though, I figured I better come out swinging to give you a taste of why part of me feels like Zenless might be a full tier above Wuthering Waves instead of just a different flavor of fun, starting with one of the biggest reasons I've played way more Zenless than Wuthering Waves over the past several months. Because this is one of those mechanics that's like a large part of what's currently making Wuthering Waves feel like a game that encourages kind of boring memorization and repetition, while Zenless feels like a game that encourages really engaging reactivity and adaptability. So without further ado, have you ever asked yourself why cooldowns exist?
Oh my gosh. Wow, that might be the most exhausting 7 minutes of reacting in my fucking life, I'm gonna be honest. I didn't know somebody could talk so much while saying so little. I didn't know that was possible. This is something different, for sure. And I know the purpose of his disclaimer was to, I guess, minimize the hate and the war in the comments, but I feel like this disclaimer was just so long. It was so long that all it's going to do is the exact opposite. Because I feel like everybody watching this video, after that disclaimer, you could be a ZZZ fan, you could be a WuWa fan. I think everybody's pissed off after this disclaimer. I think everybody's mad. Maybe he was trying to be ironic or something. I think everybody's mad after this. Now that we're actually in the vid, I'm gonna go take a quick break.
Hell no, man. What the fuck?
All right, editor. I'm sorry about that.
You wouldn't refuse me, would you?
The problem with cooldowns. Okay, here we go. Here we
In a lot
go.
of circumstances, cooldowns are there for the sake of balancing gameplay. They ensure players can't spam really powerful abilities constantly, but sometimes when it comes to character action games like Wuthering Waves in particular, they can also be an accessibility feature. One of the big barriers of entry with games like Devil May Cry is in a vacuum, handing a regular person the insanity that is Dante's 8-ish weapon moveset plus all his stances, his installs, and everything is like handing someone a blank piece of paper and saying, hey, draw me something cool. And that's so vague, most people wouldn't even know where to start. I mean, too many options can be paralyzing after all, so best case, you're just getting a lot of those S's people used to draw in middle school. Which is likely why when Ryota Suzuki, the design lead for Devil May Cry 5, went to work on Final Fantasy 16, he didn't just simplify things a little bit, he and his team shifted a lot of the traditional moveset to a series of cooldown abilities, reducing the amount players had to worry about at any given time. And that did come at a cost, which we'll get to in a moment, but I've seen a lot of feedback from people who could never quite wrap their head around DMC on how much fun they had with FF16, because not only is the moveset like a fifth of the size, but the cooldowns give you structure to play around.
Yeah, it's more accessible for a general populace, which is kind of like what they were going for with a game like Wuthering Waves, which is a gacha game, right? That's going to be played on the phone, and it's also going to be played by people that, I mean, let's be honest, not like the best ever at video games. To do good in DMC5, yeah, you need to be a bit of a freak, because there are 8, again, like you mentioned, 8 different weapons with 8 different movesets, and all these combos and stuff oriented to each one.
Instead of a blank piece of paper, cooldowns can be like a coloring book for combat. Cooldowns make it easier to build a clear order of operations to approach each fight with based on which abilities are on and off cooldown to keep the damage flowing in, and that's what a lot of people do in games like Wuthering Waves. And in this case in particular, I'd argue that's clearly what the devs want us to do, because Wuthering Waves cooldowns are like tightly wound synchronized clocks, and characters are very clearly balanced with how their cooldowns will match up with the rest of their team as well as the kind of enemies you'll be fighting in mind. So as long as you're following a combo rotation, your skills will more or less be available whenever you need them, avoiding a massive pitfall a lot of other action games that integrate too many cooldowns fall into. You see, in a lot of games like Relink and FF16, often the balance feels way off. The cooldowns take forever to refresh and enemies are fairly tanky, so you wind up spending a lot of your time basic attacking while you sit around twiddling your thumbs waiting on all your timers.
I believe people could also say that it's the exact same for games like Enfield, where I guess Enfield does sort of seem like you're, sitting on cooldowns or sitting on the skill points to regenerate quite often. And, I mean, I'm gonna be honest, isn't this kind of the same exact thing in ZZZ, where you spend a fuck ton of time basic attacking, waiting for energy to come back up? This is the exact dynamic that's in ZZZ, right? Because there are no cooldowns and you're waiting for energy, you're just spamming basic attacks until your energy is up. I thought this is, like, supposed to be the bad thing, right? But it's in ZZZ. He's talking about this like it's bad, right? Okay.
The cooldowns are so long that they heavily discourage using your abilities when you want to and encourage saving them for when you might need to later. And this is where I really do have a lot of appreciation for the way Wuthering Waves handles theirs. I mean, I would certainly prefer it if a lot of these cooldowns were shorter. Like, please, just cut the grappling hook in half. right, but I think there is a decent balance between abilities that require...
Guys, who uses the grappling hook in combat? Who actually uses the grappling hook in combat? I think it's just Jinsei. I think Jinsei is the only one that uses the grappling hook in combat. How is this relevant to the video? And you use it once per rotation as Jinsei. Who's actually using the grappling hook on any character other than Jinsei? Am I like... Is there like a secret tech that I'm not aware of?
Require cooldowns like character skills, ultimates, and echoes, and abilities powered by resource generation like Forte skills. The Forte skills in particular being one of this game's master strokes, because giving each and every character their own unique mechanic like Sanhwa's rhythm minigame adds a fun layer of depth, so you're not just passively waiting on cooldowns, and each character has their own goals to accomplish to an extent.
Yep.
Which is why when it comes to just casually roaming the open world, I think the cooldowns aren't really the biggest issue. I mean, certainly not in the way they are in Final Fantasy. Aside from how Concerto kind of throws a wrench in everything, which we'll get into another time. But like aside from that, I think the open world casual combat loop is a lot of fun. It's really strong because the devs left plenty of room for variety and flexibility when it comes to skill expression. The problem is, it all kind of falls apart as soon as you want or need to play efficiently on any level. Very broadly speaking, in gacha games, there's generally two types of combat encounters. Casual ones, where as long as you have the bare minimum stats and know how to play the game, you have nothing to really worry about, like the average open world fight.
Okay.
And serious ones, where even if you have the gear, you'll need to fully utilize the potential of your entire team to get the job done, like you'll see in most in-game activities in lengthier elite and boss encounters.
Okay.
Now, if you're anything like me, a primarily free-to-play player who doesn't have character duplicates or a ton of shiny premium weapons and hasn't had the best of luck gambling for stats, you'll know that for those more serious fights, efficiency is beyond crucial because odds are, one way or another, you're likely going into them at a slight disadvantage. Which is where the problem stems from.
Wait, so did he just say there's a problem with needing to play efficiently if you don't have high damage to clear? So there's a problem with having to play well and use the character kits well if you don't have damage? Okay. I don't see where the problem is necessarily if, okay, let's...
Which is where the problem stems from, because you know how I mentioned Wuthering Waves cooldowns are tightly wound, so if they're using an entire team effectively, the abilities you need will more or less be off cooldown when you need them? The problem is the cooldowns are actually a little too tightly wound, so if you don't follow a rotation, hell, even if you spend too much time dodging or parrying attacks, you can easily ruin your entire damage output. You may have noticed in a lot of the footage I've shown you today, every time I need to deal proper damage, fights start to look kinda samey to the point where, from a gameplay perspective, they somewhat blend together. It's the same loop of Carlotta into Shorekeeper into Yang Yang back to Carlotta and repeat with like minor variations based on where my Concerto is at or if I'm starting the fight without my ults ready.
So is there a problem that there is an optimal rotation to deal damage? I mean, I guess I'm not necessarily sure where so if you're trying to get the highest damage possible, there's an optimal rotation for it. The problem is that to get the highest damage, there's a certain rotation to do it. I guess the alternative is there's no proper rotation to do something, and so getting the highest damage is just random. You try wildly different things. I'm gonna be honest. I don't think I know any game where there isn't an optimal rotation to do something. In World of Warcraft, an MMORPG, there's a proper skill order to deal the most damage. In a fighting game, there's an optimal rotation to like juggle somebody and deal the most damage before the combo ends. In every game, there's like an optimal order to do something to do the most damage. Is that not true? That's what it feels like, right? I don't know any game where there's not an optimal way to press the buttons. In Devil May Cry 5, there's an optimal combo using a set of weapons to deal the most damage. 1000%. Because that game is like actually score based. I don't know any game where that doesn't exist. So yeah, you can do different rotations, you'll simply not deal as much damage.
And I have to finish that rotation relatively quickly or I'll miss out on a pretty sizable chunk of my damage, resulting in the exact same problem that makes Genshin Impact's combat kind of a snooze fest. Because being effective requires using all your cooldowns in a fairly strict order of operations, requiring you to use a fairly strict rotation to properly line up all your buffs and whatnot, I more or less know what every fight is going to look like before it even starts, and as a result, combat starts to feel kind of repetitive. Especially considering this is a game where you're usually going to be highly reliant on your buffs for dealing damage, and many of those buffs have their own cooldowns attached. Not to mention, a lot of those buffs can only be passed to the next character coming on field, or they tend to get lost as soon as that character swaps back off field, and the game rarely shows you all of your active buffs in the first place, making them hard to keep track of. I don't know about you, but I don't want to have to keep tabs of a bunch of invisible timers in my head while I'm trying to go toe-to-toe with Crownless.
Wait, what is he talking about? What is all this shit at the bottom of his screen? Like, literally all your fucking buffs are right there, dude. What do you mean invisible buffs? They're right there. Wait, does he not know that this status bar exists? Yeah, some buffs are invisible, but the buffs that are invisible are really minor, right? The difference between having the Heron's buff active between an outro buff active, the outro buffs are like way more impactful. And like sometimes you don't even notice that you forgot to use the Heron sometimes. I think his point is you don't know when the buffs run out. Yeah, you'll see your damage go down. And I'm pretty sure ZZZ has way more invisible buffs. I don't fucking know when Sokaku's banner waving thing is like, I don't know when the fuck the ZZZ buffs are active or not. In fact, there's less visibility in that game.
So at all times, I feel like kind of boxed in by the devs because they just insist you approach fights with relatively rigid combos and strategies if you want to do well. To be fair, there's absolutely more nuance to the rotations in Wuthering Waves than there is in Genshin, and I've got a lot of love and respect for how much additional room there is for player expression when it comes to creating your...
This level 80 boss is currently red for him. That means that his characters are like level 70 or level 60. Bro has like actually not played the game. The level 80 boss is red for him. Yeah, that means his characters are level 70 or 60. What the f...
own rotation that suits your personal playstyle preference as opposed to purely what's most optimal. For example, even though I love Yang Yang, she's not Carlotta's ideal partner, but because she's one of my favorite characters, I'm able to comfortably shift the way I use my Carlotta to adapt to integrating Yang squared into my rotations. That's great, but it doesn't make the core experience any less repetitive. You still kind of have to follow a rotation, you just have more options when it comes to...
What the fuck is he doing? He's just pressing random fucking buttons on her. He just heavy attacked like 4 times. Why is bro talking about how he's not making his own rotations when he is? Who the fuck uses a heavy attack on Carlotta? The regular heavy attack, not the charged one. What it seems like is like bro's like a little bit brain rotted from ZZZ. He's like a little bit brain rotted from ZZZ and he's just like spamming random fucking buttons. I guess he's just used to like spamming until energy comes up and then like casting the skill. And the fact that he's not able to do that and clear is like a problem.
You still kind of have to follow a rotation, you just have more options when it comes to finding your own. So I mean, it will take longer to get bored of, but I don't entirely hate cooldowns in theory, and I don't think they're all bad even in this game, but the closer I look, the harder it feels to ignore all the stifled potential for variety in moment-to-moment gameplay, largely driven by all the, in my opinion, unnecessary limitations in Wuthering Waves, especially the cooldown. And since I've been playing a lot of not just ZZZ, but PoE, I can't help but think about...
What the fuck? Why are we bringing up this game? This is a fucking... Oh, this is an entirely different genre.
PoE, I can't help but think about how much more fun Wuthering Waves would be if they traded most of the cooldowns for resource-backed systems like special energy or mana. Because the thing about cooldowns is more often than not they wind up removing a certain layer of player choice. Because you can use abilities freely in PoE as long as you have the mana, your choices are much more about which abilities to use when based on your personal preference, playstyle, and the situation at hand, not just how they support your DPS.
There's an optimal ability ordering for PoE too. You have rotations in PoE as well. And PoE apparently has cooldowns too. What is going on in this video? Some abilities have no cooldown, but that's like your basic attack. What is going on?
And so despite the fact that I'm often using the same set of 6 or 7 abilities, every fight still looks and feels fresh because the way I use those abilities is constantly shifting because mana gives you the gameplay flexibility to allow for that.
No, that means you're just playing suboptimally. Because there's a proper ordering of your abilities even in this game too to do the most damage. You're just pressing random shit. And like you're still clearing, right? Because you're pressing random shit. But like if you're playing on the highest difficulty, you have to order stuff in the right way. But he's saying like, no, in PoE 2, you can just roll your face on the fucking keyboard and do random stuff and you're fine. But like that doesn't work in the hardest content. Oh boy. Oh boy. All right, so we're now using counter examples that are just wrong.
Instead of focusing purely on output, and so does special energy. The fact that this is a resource and I'm constantly making decisions not just about how to spend it, but also how to regain it is a crucial element of the decision.
You're just spamming the basic attack button in this game until you have energy. That's all you do. You just spam the basic attack button until you have energy. And then you use the energy. That's what ZZZ combat is. There's no real variation. You're spamming basic attacks until you have energy on every character. Or you're playing a support character, right? And they just don't even enter the field. They enter the field to use their skill and their ultimate, and then they leave immediately. That's literally what ZZZ is. Sometimes you play the support character, and all they do is they enter the field, they press skill, ultimate, and then leave.
Crucial element of the decision making that keeps games like this fun long term, in my opinion. Whether we're talking about combo-centric games like Devil May Cry or ARPGs like Path of Exile, in my opinion, one of the big differentiators between a quality experience I'll keep coming back to for years and something I know I'll wind up putting down one day out of boredom is a degree of nuance and decision-making in combat, not just at the start of every fight, but in every single button press before you finish it.
Bro's just using 2 moves. His B-roll is him just using two skills.
In almost every video I've made so far, I've talked about how much I love the fact that Zenless is a game about combo routes, not rotations.
You're just spamming the basic attack button and dodging. That's all this video is.
If I go into 10 fights with one of my Miyabi Yanagi teams, all 10 are going to play out very differently because I'll be making different decisions in each and every single one, largely thanks to the fact that a resource like Special Energy allows for more situational decision-making than cooldowns do. Throughout every fight, I'm making decisions like which stance to use with Yanagi, not just driven by my buffs, but based on which is best suited to countering the enemy in front of me.
So I change the stance for a certain type of enemy, and then I proceed to spam basics until the skill is up, and then trigger an anomaly, and then switch to Miyabi, and then I spam basics until my skill is up, and then I use her special Virgil move. I proc anomaly, and then I switch to somebody else.
I'm using Bernice's special attack, not just for damage and anomaly buildup, but for the sake of dancing in and out of the iframes.
Every character does this. Oh god.
In and out of the iframes to keep my characters safe. I'm priming bosses with Miyabi, prepping them so I can guarantee a freeze right before they would recover from stun so I can give myself enough time to land a second tactical nuke and close out the fight. And for better or for worse, I think this stun DPS phase is kind of the perfect example of
why does he talk about the break bar in ZZZ, but he doesn't mention what the break bar is in WuWa? Wait, bro just talked about the break bar in ZZZ, but doesn't talk about it in WuWa. Bro didn't even talk about Zhang Liao's time slowdown. What? Why is he just...
perfect example of where the core difference between Wuthering Waves and Zenless is, because the stun DPS phase is where Zenless's combos can also get a lot more rigid. You've got a very small window of time to dish out the bulk of your damage after all, and so especially with burst DPS characters like Juyen, you kinda have to use fairly static combos to be effective. But that's a very brief, I don't know, 10-ish second window of time, and everything about the rest of the fight is still constantly shifting.
So it's like the rotations are okay because you don't have to do them that often? Wait, so the rotations are okay because you don't have to do them that often, and then every other second of the fight, you're just spamming random shit. You just basic attacking for like 30 seconds until they're broken, and then you do a rotation, and that's better? Oh, dear. Oh, dear. Yeah, this guy is just... I mean, we saw his Carlotta gameplay, ladies and gentlemen. He was just using he used the heavy attack like 3 times in a row.
Not to mention how much additional variety there is in deciding which combo route to use during stun on the fly, based on things like how close you are to freeze, for example, or what phase of the fight you're in. And the problem with Wuthering Waves is that to an extent, entire fights feel like that stun DPS phase, but with less nuance, low-key. They're just a matter of pressing the right buttons in the same order as you always do when the enemy you're fighting and their moveset is almost an afterthought as long as you're properly babysitting your cooldowns in Concerto. Which is a big part of the reason you're not going to see me quick swapping like Wallenstein anytime soon, because if you're a high-skilled player, the input complexity is kind of a non-issue, right? Because this is a fairly simplistic game at the end of the day. But as soon as you clear that barrier of entry, quick swapping trivializes fights even further, because whatever the enemy is doing really doesn't matter. If they're even allowed to move in between all the time slows.
Wait, so quick swapping is an example of like how you can vary up your rotations and do whatever you want and like have more freedom, but then suddenly it's not valid?
In between all the time slows and freezes.
There are quick swap teams that don't use Zhang Liao too, man. There are plenty of quick swap teams that don't include Zhang Liao.
The way swapping tends to reposition you out of the range of attacks on top of all the iframes you get from playing like that mean that as long as you can execute your rotation, there are very few enemies that can really do much to stop you. To the point where realistically speaking, I bet you could easily just blindfold yourself and just roll most bosses that don't have random invulnerability phases as long as your rotation is on point.
Implying you can't do that in ZZZ? Implying you can't do that in ZZZ when Pokey literally has had a run where he blindfolded himself and just fucking did it? You just hear the shung of the attack and then press the parry button? What?
Most bosses that don't have random invulnerability phases as long as your rotation is on point.
Do that against the fallacy, bro. Hey. Fallacy of no fucking return, bro. Do that against the fallacy. I dare you. I dare you. You will get your ass blown away. Do that against the fallacy of no return. You will get cooked. Oh, but wait, you're your account isn't built enough to get to the 4th level of the tower, so you've never fought the boss. Because you're doing, literally, you hid the damage numbers because you're doing 10 damage to this level 80 boss. Because your characters are level, like, 70. You're level 60 with no echoes on them. Unfortunately, you couldn't hide the enemy levels, though. You hit damage because you're actually doing 100 damage per hit.
And after writing that, I looked that up because I was curious. And yeah, it does seem pretty easy. Like, look at how little the boss fallacy moves. Like, no shade to the creator, it's a cool video, homie is very good at the game, bravo, but everything about this clip is just painful. Because this is exactly why I rarely feel engaged with fights tactically.
Brother, you've never fought this thing. You never fought this thing in the tower because you can't clear floor 3. You're using somebody else's hyper-optimized gameplay. This is like a top 0.5% player. This is literally one of the best Wuthering Waves players that's playing the game, and you're using his gameplay as an example and drawing conclusions on the game as a whole. You're not him. You're not him. Sarah, this is not like Honkai Star Rail, okay? In Honkai Star Rail, if you have the right stats and enough eidolons, you can do whatever you want, okay? This is way different. This ain't, don't make this like HSR, okay? Okay, buddy? Nah, this ain't like HSR. You can literally go do your laundry in the middle of your HSR 0 cycle. Do you disagree with everything he said? This is what I agree with. There are some teams, like Carlotta's, that are straight up, yes, they're very easy to play. But it seems like he's using one character in the game and then applying it to everybody else. Carlotta is one of the most automatic characters in the game. She's also clearly designed for newer players. That's why her gameplay is like that. Chang Li is the entire opposite. Chang Li is like the antithesis of his entire argument. Chang Li is completely not even close to the type of gameplay that he's talking about over here. And the thing is, it's like he's using one team and one character to define the entire game, when there are literally like 7 to 8 other DPSs that play wildly differently and have wildly different methods of clearing. And it's just so strange because he's using a Chang Li clip over here and then basically saying that like, oh, the game is like super static, super easy, and it just doesn't make any sense when he hasn't even played at this level before. He has not played, he can't even clear floor 3 with his account. So how would he know? He's using a top 0.1% player that has like mastered this team comp as a way to prove his point.
Because this is exactly why I rarely feel engaged with fights tactically in the same way I am in a game like
You're not this good though. You're not him. You can't play like this.
Same way I am in a game like ZZZ or PoE, and on some level it often just feels like I'm going through the motions in WuWa.
This is going through the motions? Oh, fuck me.
Like, have you ever been watching like some shonen anime where a couple of bros bond over having a
You're
conversation?
just spamming basic attacks. You are literally just spamming basic attacks.
Where a couple of bros bond over having a conversation with their fist. As silly as it may sound, at face value, I do think a good fight is a lot like a good conversation, and good conversations require input from both sides. With that in mind, ZZZ's gameplay feels like a really engaging push and pull, a heated back and forth debate between you and the enemy. Whereas Wuthering Waves feels like giving a TED Talk. Like, hey, maybe it's a really good speech, but it's still mostly a one-sided monologue, so there isn't like a single boss I enjoy fighting half as much as Shadow Jane, one of the best conversationalists in the game. So as a result of all this, from a combat perspective, Wuthering Waves just feels kind of dull in comparison to ZZZ, because the push and pull, the friction isn't really there. As soon as the enemy you're fighting, how they choose to respond to your attacks is so much less relevant to your success than simply executing a pristine combo rotation.
Why did he use B-roll of him just spamming basic attacks? His B-roll is literally him just spamming basic attacks and then using a skill when his energy is up. Oh my god, how did he make... He's a professional yapper, that's why the video is so long.
Than simply executing a pristine combo rotation. In the past, I've mentioned one of the guiding game design principles that helped the devs behind Ghost of Tsushima deliver one of the best gaming experiences in history, in my opinion. And I highly recommend their GDC talk. It's a brilliant discussion on what goes into making top-tier melee combat, but one of the parts of that talk that has stuck with me the most over the years was what they described as their #1 rule when it comes to making world-class games. The most effective way to play should be the most enjoyable way to play, and all too often in Wuthering Waves, managing your cooldowns is such a significant priority, it unironically feels more effective to ignore the enemy in front of you to an extent and just focus on your rotation to optimize your cooldowns and concerto instead. Because if you waste too much time dodging, fishing for parries, or trying to mix up your combos, you'll ruin your damage. And in my mind, that's as much of a design failure for a character action game like this as an open world that locks movement behind paywalls, making it a chore to explore, so you wind up fast.
Does Blood not know that intro skills are the best parry moves in the game? Like, does he not know that Yinlin's intro skill has like 7,000 parry frames? If you use it and like during the boss's parry window, it's like guaranteed to fucking work. She does like 17 hits with that thing, and each of them parries. Has bro never parried with like Verina's intro skill? Does he not know that intro skills do more damage to stagger bars? Does he also not know that there's no cooldown on Concerto either? And so this whole argument against cooldowns actually doesn't exist for something like Concerto Energy, which has no cooldown at all and gives you access to these super powerful intro skills, and batteries characters like Chang Li, where it gives her a stack of her forte bar. There's just so many counterexamples to every single thing that he's saying is like making Wuthering Waves worse. And the fact of the matter is that bro literally has played two characters, Zhang Liao and Carlotta, and now he's drawing conclusions about all of the combat in the game from playing two fucking characters. That is what this video seems like. He's played two characters, maybe three if you include fucking Yang Yang, has gotten to level 60, hasn't even cleared the third tower, and now he's talking about the game as a whole, when he hasn't touched 3/4 of the roster. Oh my god.
Traveling everywhere. In fact, if you're a high-skilled player, a lot of fights may as well just be like putting the god of chess, Magnus Carlsen, in a room with like some random member of the local high school chess club. A student might be pretty good, who knows, but they're like never going to be able to keep up with one of the best to ever play the game. Lord knows before they even sat down, Carlsen probably already had every move he needed to secure a win mapped out in his head, and more likely than not, within the first two moves, the game is effectively over already. It's just a
What are you saying? What is this guy saying? You know what? We can't call EO the Riddler anymore. This guy is the new Riddler. We owe EO an apology. We owe EO an apology. What is this guy saying? Why are you even bringing up chess? Oh god.
It's just a matter of him finishing it. Not to imply I'm like even vaguely close to a Carlsen level of skill when it comes to my gaming ability, but the guy's been on my mind lately. Partially because there's been drama at the chess championships. Yes, I am a nerd, shut up. But also because his stance on the state of competitive—
Dude, you suck at this game. You can't clear floor 3. You suck at this game. Like, you're bad. Your characters aren't built. You haven't cleared any of the endgame content in here. Like, you suck. I don't know how you felt comfortable making a video about, like, the combat in the game when you haven't done any of the endgame at all. What's the point? Like, your characters are, like, level 70. 8 months into release. You have Zhang Liao, so you've been playing since very early on. You have Shorekeeper, too. How are you stuck on floor 3?
State of competitive chess really resonates with the core of my issue with Wuthering Waves combat, because for years, my guy's been walking around saying stuff like this.
Almost say why not? What am I doing? Why am I spending all this time playing classical chess?
Why are you comparing yourself to Magnus Carlsen, a guy who's reached the upper echelons of chess, and then you haven't even cleared floor 3 of the tower? Why are you comparing yourself to somebody who's playing Chang Li Quickswap blindfolded when you haven't cleared floor 3 of the tower? Where is this ego coming from to even like slightly even like begin to put yourself in the same conversation as these other people? You haven't cleared floor 3 of the tower. How are you doing this? What is this ego?
Classical chess, which I just find, stressful and boring, but,
And now, at face value, that might be a bit surprising to hear from the man who's effectively been the king of chess for like the past decade, and I wouldn't blame you if you just assumed he was, just tired and burnt out from playing chess his entire life. But that's not really what he's getting at. You see, he's saying all that because classical chess specifically kinda just sucks in a lot of ways. It's a slow, monotonous slog where if you're good enough, everything is predictable to an extent, which I think is why Carlsen described it as stressful, because that level of predictability puts an expectation on you, even if it's a personal one, to perform perfectly, because that's like, there's always going to be a right answer, and if you're good enough, you should be able to find it. And I think that's a big part of why Carlsen has been a major advocate for playing different kinds of chess, like Fischer Random, where entire backline positioning is shifted around, and when talking about it not that long ago, he said this: "What we're playing is in many ways a purer long-form game than normal classical chess, because you're sitting down at the board and you have to think about it from the very beginning, and it just feels fresh." And that really resonated with me, because that's exactly how I feel about Zenless in comparison to games like Wuthering Waves, Final Fantasy, and Genshin.
What? You do rotations in Zenless to get the most damage in. It's not like you start off with random energy on all your characters. You start off with the same amount of energy on everybody. How are you comparing Zenless Zone Zero to a chess game where the pieces' positions are randomized? What? Do you start off with a random number of Miyabi stacks? Does it just RNG between 1 and 4?
And Genshin, in no small part thanks to their focus on cooldowns and timers. Those games that choose to restrict their combat so much or pigeonholed into rotations instead of flexible routes feel like—
You do the same thing in Zenless, but you simply spend more time outside of the rotations spamming basic attacks. That's why every single player that's played Zenless calls it button mashy, because literally, you're just spamming basic attacks for 75% of the gameplay. And honestly, if you're playing Anomaly, you're spamming basic attacks for 95% of the gameplay. There's actually more gameplay variation in Impact teams than there are in the Anomaly teams. The Anomaly teams, you're just spamming basic the entire fucking time. So it's actually less variation.
like boring, pretentious, pinky in the air. No, you can't wear those jeans here. Were you crazy? Classical chess. Because I more or less know what every fight is going to look like before it starts. It's just a matter of finishing it. And the challenge is almost more about your ability to repeat your rotation enough times to win.
That's literally DMC5. Repeating your rotations until you win. I think he doesn't like the concerto system. That's the funny fucking thing. Because the concerto system, ladies and gentlemen, has no cooldown at all.
While on the other hand, Zenless is like Fisher Random, where I know how to play the game, I'm familiar with all the pieces, but every fight feels fresh to an extent, because the way the game is structured, you constantly
You're
have to
just
adapt to your
spamming your
available resources
basics.
as well your opponent's
You're just
behavior
spamming
on the
basic
fly to
attacks.
succeed. Despite
That's
the
all
game's
you're
flaws,
doing.
though, like I said at the top, I do like Wuthering Waves,
The
and I actually—
B-roll is just him spamming basic attacks. That's all he's been doing. He's just on Yanagi pressing the left mouse button. He's just spamming the left mouse button. Literally, is that not what he's doing right now?
Like I said at the top, I do like Wuthering Waves, and I actually think a lot of its hiccups are potentially kind of easy to address. Even just taking a page out of ZZZ's playbook where Concerto was concerned would do a lot to loosen up the combat variety and help the gameplay feel more cohesive.
Yeah, it's called swap to another character when your concerto energy is almost full to not use an intro skill. It's called swap off the character when your bar is at 90% if you want to use the intro skill later. So it's in the game. You just don't know how to play it. He just doesn't know how to play Wuthering Waves, and he made a video on the combat. Why are you
That's a story
glazing
for
this
next
vid?
time, though, because like I said, this is just the first of many discussions about the mechanics in both of these games, and I have so much to say about—
This needs to be the last. If this is your understanding of Wuthering Waves playing on a UL40 account where you haven't even cleared past floor 3 and you've only played 1 or 2 characters and now you're making general conclusions about the game, the videos need to stop until you actually know what you're talking about. I'm being honest. Like, the videos should stop until you actually have maybe a 10 to 15% understanding of the game. And you're making a 26-minute video about why the combat is bad when you actually have no idea what you were talking about. You need to understand more about the game if you want to make actually good content about this game.
Concerto, we would easily be here for another 20 to 30 minutes, and don't even get me started on the ecosystem. So for now, all I'll say is, generally speaking, I'm reasonably confident that Wuthering Waves is comfortably on the road to success. 2.0 was a groundbreaking update, and if they manage to deliver something similar every 6 months or so like they have planned, it's only a matter of time before Wuthering Waves is a kind of unstoppable household name. But here's the thing. Fun open worlds are a dime a dozen, while stylish character action combat remains to this day one of the most underserved genres of gaming. So as happy and impressed as I am to see them doing incredible things with the world of Wuthering Waves, I'm really hoping the combat mechanics continue to evolve in a similar way. Regardless if they do or don't though, I'll be here breaking down how things play out, because like I said—
You still have no idea what you're talking about, man. It sounds like the video's at its conclusion, but there's still a whole 4 more minutes.
Zenless and Wuthering Waves are 2 of the best character action games in modern memory, and considering their current trajectory, I'd be surprised if they weren't mainstays for at least the next 5 to 10 years. And considering in so many ways they may as well be 2 branches of the same tree that just happen to sprout in different directions, they're the perfect head-to-head comparison to use as a vehicle for getting to the bottom of the little details, the small imperfections and overlooked master strokes that genuinely define what sets a good character action game apart from a truly great one. So stay tuned, because we're going to keep the conversation going in the next videos. I try to get to the bottom of not just whether ZZZ's combat feels better than Wuthering, but why or why not.
It doesn't. It doesn't feel better than Wuthering, because every single B-roll that you've shown about the fucking game is a character spamming the left mouse button and dodging. That's all they're doing. They're spamming the left mouse button and dodging. That's all you've shown this entire video. And you're saying that ZZZ is like some amazing pioneer that like lets you do so many random crazy things every fight, and all you're doing is spamming the left mouse button on your DPS character. That's it. That's all we've seen.
So maybe subscribe, and let's find the answer together, because I would love to hear your thoughts too. What do you think?
Bro's just sitting on his full energy bar. Maybe he actually doesn't know how to play ZZZ either, right? Are you supposed to sit on this much energy on Bernice? Are you supposed to sit on this much energy? She's overcapped. No? Yeah, this is like being on a Wuthering Waves character and then not using their skill when it's off cooldown. Like, it's just the ability is ready and you're just not using it.
Am I cooking or am I crazy? How do you feel about the cooldowns and rotations? I'd genuinely like to know, because one of my favorite parts of making videos for all of you is the incredibly detailed, well thought out comments I get from people sharing their perspectives, even if you happen to disagree. I know the focus of the channel for quite some time has mainly been guides, and those aren't going away. They never will, because I love making guides. But from a practical perspective, going into 2025, it is time to switch gears a bit. Largely because timing is beyond crucial when it comes to guides. And
maybe stop doing this and level up your fucking characters. Maybe stop going in the tub pup and level up your fucking characters. I'm gonna be honest, dude. There's not a single person in the world that is going to take your guides seriously when they're seeing you do 100 damage per hit against the level 80 bosses on floor 3 of the tower. There is 0% chance anybody takes any of your guide content seriously. 0%. Because you don't know how to play the game and you're trying to tell people what to do or what's wrong with it. Guide maker, guide breaker. Yeah. Guide breaker.
Time to switch gears a bit. Largely because timing is beyond crucial when it comes to guides and the gacha space in particular. Thanks in part to how straightforward these games are, plus the culture around early access content, and just life-wise right now, I'm not in a position where I have enough time to consistently make guides often enough to justify them being the main focus of the channel.
You're not even in the position to play the game that you're making a 26-minute critique about. You don't even have enough time to play Wuthering Waves. It's been 8 months since release and you haven't cleared floor 3 of the tower. It's been 8 months and you have not cleared floor 3 of the fucking tower.
I might go into more detail about precisely what this means for my content on the channel in an update video at some point, but the TLDR is I'm effectively a caretaker for my grandparents, because, as happens, they just hit that age a few years back where they needed a bit more help during the day, and since I largely work from home anyways, outside of like the occasional on-site visit or like meetings or whatever, it just made a lot of sense for me to be around, right? And it still does. I mean, I can't tell you how fortunate I feel to still have them in my life, let alone to be in a position where I've been able to help like take care of them and stuff, right? The only thing is their health has kind of declined rather severely in the past year or so.
I get the situation, but like, why in this video? I'm gonna be honest, this video was a bit of a disaster. I think largely from the perspective of this guy has only played like 2 characters on his account, Carlotta and Zhang Liao, and Yang Yang as a sub DPS, and he's going ahead and just making these wide sweeping conclusions about the game when there are literally examples of characters in WuWa that are going against every single thing that he's saying is like a detriment. And the fact that he's playing one character whose gameplay is pretty static like Carlotta, he's now making general assumptions about that gameplay to every single other thing on the roster and every single mechanic on the roster. And he's using ZZZ as this sort of like shining spotlight of like gameplay variation and amazing depth when literally all you do on that game is just spam the basic attack button until your skill is up and then use your skill. If you're playing Anomaly, if you're playing Impact, you spam the basic attack button and your skill on your Impact character until they're broken, and then you do a rotation. And so it's just all the same criticisms that you're putting on Wuthering Waves, you literally have for ZZZ, except ZZZ is even less complex. That's why people call it a button masher, because you quite literally are button mashing. You're spamming basic attacks for such a long period of time in that game. And that's why people say they get bored of ZZZ's combat, because you're kind of just like, and then you press your skill once in a while. Effectively, everything in ZZZ has a cooldown too. It's just resource-based cooldowns. They're the same goddamn thing. So, I mean, I don't know what leg this guy has to stand on. I think the worst part was like the whole like ego tripping where he started comparing himself to Magnus Carlsen and he started comparing himself to like blindfolded Chang Li, Zhang Li quickswap players, where it's just like, yeah, because after I saw these, yeah, this is exactly how I feel about you. Don't even know how to play the game, dude. Like, you're not that good. You're not him. I don't know where you're finding the ego to like compare yourself to these individuals in the first place. It's so weird. And just this entire video is just weird. I mean, I don't know who's agreeing with this. It's strange. Let me know what you all think. This was a long ass video. Hopefully we can edit it down. Peace out.